so much. I'm doing a quick time check. So we have the cinema until 8:30, and then you're welcome to stay in the bar for more conversation. I will make the introduction short. We're here, as I said, with the co-director Alisa Lebow, who's a professor of screen media at University of Sussex, and the author of several books, editor and author, including First Person Jewish from 2008, which was very relevant to this film on Jewish autobiographical first-person filmmaking, which I highly recommend. Treyf is from 98. More recent projects that are probably of interest to this audience include Filming Revolution, which is which you can watch online or navigate online. It's an interactive documentary on the Egyptian Revolution. So I highly recommend checking that out. Without further ado, we're going to start with a couple of questions between us, but we don't really want to monopolize the conversation. The point is for this to be as interactive as possible to get people's responses to the film. If I'm a little brutal, questions should be questions, not necessarily monologues. just a heads up.
She's going to cut you off.
Yeah. Oh, at least I'm going to say I'm going to cut you off, and please don't make me have to prove to you that I actually am going to cut you off. So, yeah. And I'm Na'ama from Na'amod, as people like to remind me. But I am, I don't know if it's possible to turn the light.
Yeah, the projector.
The projector light.
What is that?
If you came forward, would it help?
Yeah, maybe.
Genius.
Yeah. There you go. Okay, we have more technically adept people in the audience.
We're like...
Okay, so
let's face one another.
Yeah.
We'll pretend you're not here.
Yeah.
For a minute.
The strange staged conversation. I just wanted to ask about your choice, I guess in the broad sense, of using autobiography as a sort of strategy of representation, and why and how that intersects with the film's political objectives, I guess.
I think first, probably I should say, I haven't seen this film for a while and conditions have changed dramatically. So it's a very different, it's a historical object. It's not speaking to today. I think that's probably important to say. And at the time Cynthia and I knew we were going to make a film called Treyf before we had any idea what the film was. So the title existed. And then when we started working on the film, we knew the hook was being Jewish lesbians. But we knew that was not the difficulty that we needed to address. And the difficulty that we needed to address was the elephant in the room, was Zionism. I don't know about you guys, but throwing a bunch of facts and figures at your, Zionist parents, relatives, or whatever, never really seemed to move the needle at all, right? There was no rational conversation that I could possibly imagine having, on film or otherwise, that was going to make any dent. And Cynthia and I realized that the way in to that conversation was, I guess you could say, through the personal. Some kind of affective conversation, something that hits people more emotionally, which is absolutely manipulative, yes. But we had no other way in. There was no conversation. Conversations just weren't happening. They just got cut off completely. So in a sense, it wasn't that we thought we were so interesting or that we had such a fascinating story to tell at all, but that we had no other way in to moving things along. Remember, the film comes out in 98, we start making it in 95. There was no movement, no progressive Jewish movement that was dealing with Zionism in Israel. It did not exist. I had to go back and check, when did Jewish Voice for Peace start? Because we were unaware of it when we started, because we started before it existed. They come together, just a bunch of undergraduates in Berkeley in 1996, So when we're writing the script and starting to fundraise for the film is when some people, we're in New York, there's some undergraduates in Berkeley who have an idea. There's no movement at all. It doesn't exist. So we really we had to find a strategy, and in some sense a voice, to speak what felt very much like the unspeakable at the time. I mean, we know it's still controversial, but at that point, at least, we have to consider the context. As New York Jewish, I was obviously raised. The story is actually true. Raised very much in a Zionist household. Wow, how, where do you start? So we just started by saying, we are your daughters. You made us. Right? You can't, well, you can excommunicate us, as you can see in one of the interviews, but you can't deny that we are a part of you. You can't say we are somehow outside of this. And that seemed very important at the time. Is it important now? I don't even know. In fact, I will be wanting to hear a lot more from you guys very, very, very soon.
Yeah, it took them. No, I mean, also the interesting impulse to kind of the urgency of making a critique from within, and the anxiety about it being within, which is sort of that ambiguity is coded in the Treyf, what you say in the film, right? Which is like it's only intelligible as outside once it's already inscribed.
Yeah,
being
you're already
within.
insider. Yeah.
Yeah, and
There's no getting out of this.
Yeah, and there's a whole kind of like performance and construction with all the chachkas. I don't know how to say it. I didn't have this Yiddish guide.
Yeah, that's fine.
I didn't have this Yiddish guide at home. I was the daughter of Israelis. Yeah, I mean, there was something in that feeling that you're saying that one strategy was affect. And I think it's interesting when you said that one thing that's actually true in the film. And the other being the kind of credibility of the position of being the kind of the constructed Jewish, these two voices that bleed into each other, and it sort of resonated for me a little bit with the positioning of Jewish diaspora movements today on the contemporary left that is sort of constructing for itself some kind of also credibility or intelligibility, or like, are we within, and how do we then perform our Jewishness, and how do we... So I'm just throwing that out there for all the people I know here who are involved in Jewish left activism. But I think historically that's changed. Now there's a whole kind of contemporary, like almost smorgasbord of possibilities for what it means to be publicly Jewish and on the left today. I'm violating my own guidelines for questions by monologuing. So I'm going to cut that short. And this is where I should have had my questions. What struck you now watching it in terms of, I mean, you had a real strong desire to say, look, I look at it now as a historical object, and we do see now a little bit more cultural production on the Jewish left. What strikes you as possible or impossible about the way this film was made and today, and where are the sort of lines drawn differently?
I mean, there's so much in that I'm almost certainly not going to be able to address, and a much bigger conversation to be had about, what does it mean to position oneself kind of within Jewishness, but kind of at its outskirts or at its limits almost, or to be pushing those limits and insist that that's still part of the conversation. And I think that's what many of us are trying to do in different ways. We were, figuring it out on our own in this film. It was important for us to try and think about what is a Jewish secular identity. I mean, obviously it has existed for some time, but how do you represent it? And what do you do with that? And so the chachkas come up as one way, and kind of a utopian sense of community comes up, and but we're, is that important today? We didn't have a movement really to speak of. We were part of a progressive Jewish organization called JFRIJ at the time, the Jews for Racial and Economic Justice, which was an organization that was very important to us. There are several people in the film who were part of JFRIJ as well, but JFRIJ wouldn't touch anything international because it meant they were going to have to deal with Israel, and they thought that that was going to pull them apart completely. So, we had some connection to community and political organizing on the left as Jews, but it was all very limited. It felt kind of tiny. And it absolutely felt like it was avoiding the main issue. So, right. So I don't feel like, well, it's taboo in many circles still today, but there is a movement. There are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of Jews. I fantasize there are more, but there's no evidence of that, who are kind of in opposition to mainstream Jewish politics and certainly to Zionist politics, and that's a game changer. We didn't know that, so we kept trying to sort of find a way, find an aesthetic, find a sentiment, a feeling. Humor was really important for us in the film, but we have to even consider color palettes, everything. What does it look like? So in some sense we felt very much like we were inventing something, and today that's doesn't need to be invented, but maybe it's important to have had antecedents, and I think that's one of the things we don't have. Right, there's all kinds of Jewish traditions that continue for 5,000 years, but this isn't one of them. And so showing the film today for me is actually part of sort of, can we extend the tradition? Can we say that there were people before who were trying to figure this out, in whatever way we could, flawed and otherwise, but maybe it's important to say, you are not having to invent the wheel if that's what you feel you're doing, that you can build on things.
Yeah, and it's kind of like in the closing sequence a little bit as well, reaching out. But there's also the paradoxes of a kind of Treyf, constructing a tradition that is Treyf, that is dissonant, that is, kind of slipping. And I think that's an impulse now with a lot of recovery of sort of early streams of anti-Zionism or dissident Zionism in the early 20th century. But it's interesting also to me that it's sort of tethered to a wider gamut of questioning, I think, also it's not that, so you say, and you're very straightforward about the primary intervention being bringing what was unspeakable, to the fore, but it's accompanied by a whole revisiting of the kind of pathos of all of your, from the two slightly parallax perspectives of your kind of Zionist, long-distance nationalist kind of family and Cynthia's, at least the way it's constructed in the film, more religious, tacitly Zionist upbringing, and also much more kind of lived experience of the place, or connection at least to the landscape of Jerusalem, and seeing her sort of demonstrate that, connect to that and stage it, which I thought was interesting, and I wondered whether that would be possible today. But it comes also with the questioning around, Holocaust memory, around, also around secularism, post World War II Jewish Americanness, what's American, what's lesbian, what's Jewish, and how all these three plotted together, and that kind of process of invention or recovery, or something both, was kind of interesting to me, that Israel is not actually pitted there in isolation with all of those other questions.
That's
feel like
interesting you say that, because it's the first time I've watched this film many times, as you can imagine, but not for a long time, which is good. And watching it today, I realized that the whole end, where we're kind of working out what it means to be lesbian, secular Jews, we kind of let go of the Zionist critique altogether. How do like we leave Jerusalem and we're like, okay, no. Mm-mm. And that's it. So that, I'm like, wow, we missed that trick. And I am only noticing it now. Because obviously it was still in need of really kind of working and thinking about what it means to be a Jewish lesbian. This just does not seem like a big deal right now anymore. But, whoa, that's a big omission that we neglected to kind of continue to think about what it means toward the end of the film. We kind of just say, no, we're not moving here. This place is a mess. As if New York isn't, for one thing, and as if, like, okay, so now we can just deal with, identity politics, which seems a very 90s solution to the whole thing, but it does, for now, it's like, wow, that was quick. So, yeah, to me, I see it differently now than I could have possibly seen it. For a good decade of bringing this film around, talking about it all, I never noticed this. I'm sitting there going, whoa.
You have a sort of paean to New York, though, which is the sort of like quiet response in the way the letter sequence.
Yeah, it's choosing sort of leftist, secular, Yiddishist New York. It's absolutely saying that, for sure. But it's I can't today leave that critique there. Right? There seems a lot more to say now. But again, we're in a very different phase, shall we say.
Yeah, and even that you talk about the lesbian or the queer politics as the identity politics part, and the critique of Zionism has nothing to do with that. I mean, for me, it sounds strange because it's such a politicized identity now. So when I think of Jewish politics, and we leverage that identity, and there's always the difficulties of that. What you're trapped in when you try to also use the power of that. But you're sort of trapped in a certain prison.
So we took this to, the film did its own, touring, did some international festivals, not very many, but did a lot of Jewish festivals in the U.S., and you'd be amazed how many there are, or were. Anyway, it was just like an incredible number. And the questions there were certain recurrent questions, which I don't think will come up here, likely, which had to do with, I'm cool with the lesbian part and I came here for that, but like, why did you have to go into geopolitics? How interesting. So we're allowed, it was kind of an early version of pink washing, you could say, right? It's fine, we're good, we're happy with ourselves, we're not homophobic, look. Yeah. Why did you have to mess that up? But that came up a lot, and maybe I'm still in that paradigm to some extent. Identity politics and geopolitics. But yeah, of course. Of course.
For me, the Jewish politics.
Should we open it?
Yeah, I was just about to say. Just put your hands up. Would you like me to take 3 at a time, or?
I don't have any notes, but yeah.
Let's see.
If you keep them short, I can take 3 at a time.
Yeah, maximum 3 at a time, but we may just start with the first brave person to put their hands up.
Oh, you don't have to be brave.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, please.
Hi. Thank you for the movie. It was really great. Can you I heard you referring several times to what you call Jewish left. Can you just give me a definition of how you would define it? In any way? Because I have an understanding that is very Eurocentric and towards capitalism, basically.
Against.
Oh, yes, indeed. But I have a hard time figuring out what it is, the Jewish left that you were referring to, naturally.
Sure. I'm going to take one more.
Yes, I love the film. It's incredible, and it makes me so proud to be Jewish and gay. And it's just incredible. So good to see a lesbian film as well. My questions are: did you respond to your voicemails? Part of the script. How did your parents generally respond, you and Cynthia? And do you think you're a non-Zionist because you're a lesbian, or you're a lesbian because you're not Zionist?
Well, Craig, you had
questions.
They are questions.
Craig, you had 3, so now I'm stumped because I was going to take
No,
the
let's
but
just
let's do these 2.
Do you want to answer what is the Jewish left?
Not really, but I will. Why don't you answer Craig's and then we'll come back to that one.
All right, I'll answer Craig's if I can remember them. Yes. should we go backwards? Not a causal relationship. I'm pretty sure. I'm not I call myself an anti-Zionist. I'm not an anti-Zionist because I'm a lesbian, or vice versa. But I definitely think it doesn't hurt to have already have a reason to feel somewhat outsider to the culture, and to have witnessed, the problems of any dominant aspect of a culture, right? Just say, wait a second, I don't identify. It makes it, certainly, this is a Jose Munoz point, it makes it a lot easier to disidentify in many ways. But I wouldn't say it's causal. That would be a hard one to figure out. I don't know how it would be causal, but yes, there's a relationship to that. Parents' response. My father was actually dying when he died the year it came out, and he watched, I think the last cut that he saw was fine cut. It was, so the sound hadn't been mixed, the color hadn't. You probably don't realize we actually did a sound mix and color mix, but we did. And he had a very interesting response. I mean, this is somebody who was literally on his deathbed, and he said he was very proud of me, and that this was so unexpected, that Israel was a great disappointment for him. This is somebody who his greatest heroic moment was to have participated in the Aliyah immigration after World War II as a mechanic on these huge ships, taking displaced persons from Europe to Palestine, etc. That it had been a great disappointment to him, and this was the odd thing that I've sort of been trying to understand for 30 years, 20 years, whatever. That he thought it was going to be more like Switzerland. All right. Anyway, poor guy. My mother had the strangest reaction because, I mean, until she really lost her memory to dementia, which, took a while. I was the greatest disappointment on earth because of my relationship to, what she would say, to Israel. But she was very strangely proud of the film, and she not only came to several screenings, and especially the ones in Florida in her community, but she actually had me show it to friends, which I still cannot figure out how or why that happened. Because the fights didn't stop after the film, and the disagreements remained very much alive. But there was something about the creative act. I'm sure she wished that it was about something else. But she had a very contradictory relationship to it. Cynthia's father was a fan of the film, and her mother, although I don't think her mother was particularly offended by how she's portrayed in the film, but she, couldn't quite relate to it, as I remember. Was there a third question?
Voicemails.
The voicemails. Okay, so we really did receive a whole bunch of voicemails, right? Or voice messages, they were called. And what we did was we kind of kept track of all of them, and the really interesting ones we had people redo. Some are redoing their own, and others are doing someone else's. But yeah, that's reenacted, recreated, I don't know the difference.
The Jewish left. I'll be traditionalist about it and say I would think of it as the organized left, which would be the movements that are springing up all across diaspora. I would say the sort of media ecology around that, like Jewish Currents, Vashti here. You see it also European. There are new networks like European Jews for Palestine and kind of transcontinental. And then I'm less familiar with it, but outside North America and Europe as well, there are in Latin America, there's in South Africa, there's in Australia, there are some alternative Jewish councils, so different bodies of representation. So I think it is, I mean, that's exactly what you were saying, that this didn't exist. And now not only does it exist in America with JVP, and if not now, but all, and JFridge. Difficult acronym. But it exists, you know, on different scales and across. So, you know, once it's organized, I think I can talk about it. I'd like to talk about it. Let's take some other questions. Yeah.
I was curious to just hear what you said, that there was the piece you didn't develop was about your kind of you've done with Jerusalem, with Israel, and I wondered what you'd have done with that.
You mean toward the end, why we just sort of leave it off?
Yeah, the bit that you said you didn't debate with hindsight, you'd like to have developed that. I wondered what you'd like to have said or done with it.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I haven't put myself back in making this film. Maybe, hopefully, never again. But the idea that we were just done with it and moved on seems impossible to me now.
Exactly,
I can't imagine that I can't imagine that we weren't still thinking we needed to work through something further, because we're all still working through something further. But it was, I guess what I'm trying to say is sort of a sign of the times that we could think that way and could think, well, actually, let's just, see if we can't imagine our kind of ideal or utopian community in New York. As if the question of Zionism or anti-Zionism can just be put to one side. That I wouldn't have, if I were making this today, which I probably wouldn't be doing, I can't imagine putting it to one side. There's no putting it to one side anymore. Not that there ever was, but now it's out, undeniable. Like, I wake up with it in the morning, I go to sleep with it at night, it doesn't go away. So, how nice for us back in the 90s that we could do that, but it doesn't feel like that today.
Yes, at the back.
You mentioned going into the West Bank to see some of your Palestinian friends. Did you ever consider putting them in the film? Was that a question that was brought up?
This came up in a conversation that we just had. But do we want to collect more questions, or shall I?
Yeah, go on.
I'm uniquely terrible at this, but
No. I'm just not very good with my eyesight.
can't see anything.
Megan.
Hi. It's another one about the different reactions and responses. It's been interesting to hear how people responded in the 90s, how your parents responded. And I'm also wondering, you said you've shown it internationally. I really responded and related so much to the New York diaspora culture. And I'm wondering also how, in the international film festivals here in the UK, how people respond differently.
Oh, it actually was in Flair before Flair was Flair.
Yeah.
The British, what was it? I don't even remember what they called themselves. BFI, I don't know what it was called. Lesbian and Gay Film Festival, Gay and Lesbian Film Festival. Anyway, it was only that. And that wasn't because they were transphobic, it was because they had no idea. That was so interesting to show it here, because we had shown it already in the US a few times, and we had a New York screening that was filled to the rafters, and it was sort of out of control and hilarious and kind of fabulous. And England did what England does. I mean, we were like, whoa, well, maybe there are no Jews here, or, I don't know. I mean, and I've lived here now for over 20 years, I know how to deal with that, I know how to kind of break through that, but I did not know at the time. And we were like, do they hate it? It's like, we had no idea. I still have no idea. But
We love it.
well, now, but I mentioned to Na'ama earlier that it showed at the Jerusalem Film Festival, and so this is 1998, and it's at the Jerusalem Film Festival. We were terrified. The peace process by then had pretty much fallen through. When we released the film, it was still the Oslo B peace process, which was, as anyone who knows anything about that history, a very flawed peace process. But it was nonetheless a peace process. So we were thinking that the film was going to be released, and within 6 months, shelved, not relevant, fine. May it be not relevant? That seemed good, seemed like a good outcome. But that wasn't the case. And so when we were in Jerusalem, it was, not a great time, but it was prior to the Second Intifada, way before the wall was built, before, so many things. And apparently we were told, because we knew some people at the Cinematheque where the Jerusalem Film Festival was held, and when we were there doing the research for the film and writing the script, we curated something for the Cinematheque there, and we knew a lot of people there. And we were told that the jury had wanted to. Actually, there were extra screenings organized because it was that popular at the Jerusalem Film Festival. So that was already a huge surprise. It was selling out, and people were talking about it, and it was happening. Right? They wanted to give us a prize. And yet, the mayor of Jerusalem at the time was a man named Teddy Kollek, who I guess had his legs blown off in a terrorist attack. And Jerusalem was a major funder of the Jerusalem Film Festival. The city was a funder. And they were too scared to give us the prize, so they gave us a special mention. So already, we're talking 98, already that kind of censorship was happening, those kinds of sensitivities were happening. The response by the audiences were tremendous, but it made people very nervous. The question about Palestinian inclusion, this is fascinating to me. That did not come up for us. And it has something to do with my own political training probably, which is to do your work in your damn community that's making a goddamn mess of things, right? And it seemed absolutely, we have a primary audience for this film, American Jewish community. There is a kind of insiderness to it. We don't explain every reference. We don't subtitle everything. We don't. And it's kind of like an onion skin of a film, right? You may not get you may not be able to peel down to the core and get all the references. You're going to get it though. It's not going to go right over your head if you don't know all of the religious references or cultural references, or you can't read the Hebrew, or you'll get it, but you may not get everything. You may not get. But it was. I mean, we worked with Palestinians. One of the scenes is shot in our friend's Old City Jerusalem apartment, a Palestinian friend. The sound person in all of the shoots done in Israel and Palestine was a Palestinian. We were in conversation with people, but it somehow seemed like the address is to Jews: getting your shit together, and it didn't seem like representing Palestinians was in at all in our remit. Like that seemed pretty far from our work. But then the question is what would their burden of representation be in that context? Well, I mean, I know my mother. That's my frame of reference for a Zionist is my mother, who in so many ways was a lovely person, but in relation to Palestinians and what she called Arabs, I sort of half joke that it was kind of like having a KKK, a Klan member, as in your family. Not okay, absolutely racist. So what would we be proving? That they're human? does that really need to be proven? Like, that's just, you know, that's insane. So it was more like, talk to your people, which was how we could figure out to do it. But it's interesting that it came up twice today. Probably you'd have to do it differently today. I don't know.
Well, I actually agree with the choice not to. But the question is posed always about that. But someone throw some questions at us. Hey, such powers. So I'll take from the right to the yeah.
There's a couple of times in the film that you mentioned like Sephardic experience. Were there any like different reactions of Sephardic Jews at Auschwitz?
Okay, that's one.
I was wondering if your, I forgot how you worded it, but your lack of conclusion to the debate of Zionism, if it's, if you're looking at it as the creator, if it's about how the film ended up, or if it's about being a potential spokesperson. Yeah.
Okay.
Ben?
Forgive me if this question is too personal, just ignore it, just push it aside. But I recently filmed my first ever film. I haven't edited it together yet, but I filmed it. I took my parents to Vienna. I won't go into the reasons why. But as a result of it, it was a documentary about my mum, but I ended up having a very, very interesting and potentially life-changing conversation with my dad while out there. And I just wondered how, if at all, making the film changed your relationship with Cynthia, or if you had any conversations that you maybe wouldn't have had if you didn't make the film. Again, if that's too personal, just push it aside, that's fine.
Sephardic responses, the concern for leaving it open-ended, like what is behind the concern, and
How?
life-changing conversations.
Doesn't have to be life-changing, but as in, did it bring you close? Did it push you apart? Did it bring up anything that maybe you were thankful that the film catalyzed a conversation, maybe.
Okay. In terms of Sephardic responses, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think we deal relatively poorly with Sephardic representation in the film. We know at the time at least, we knew very little about that. And, you know, there's a dominant Ashkenazi presence, Jewish presence in New York, absolutely undeniable. And so I kind of cringe at the representation here in that it feels tokenistic and kind of out of place. And we have my friend Madeline Remez kind of speaking to it by saying she doesn't really know anything about it. You know, but that, you know, it's speaking to a place and a time for sure. And that is a dominant culture that I'm part of and that I wasn't breaking out of at that point, or hadn't thought to. I don't have a recollection of any responses, either negative or positive in that regard, but maybe people were being kind, I don't know. In terms of, I like the idea. I mean, I don't imagine I'm a spokesperson for really anything, but I guess there's a responsibility when you make a film, and when this is a heavily scripted film, obviously, you are, as part of the conversations, you're having loads of conversations about how to handle material, how to work it, how to bring audiences along, what do you kind of need to raise, have you addressed this, for example, the Sephardic issue? Well, no, we haven't, but, I guess looking at it now, I can see that there's a tension in the film, and I can actually remember times when I would kind of go to Cynthia and say, can't we just make this about being Jewish lesbians? Like, we have enough material, and there is a lot there, and, I was just having sleepless nights. Many of them. I was terrified to make, to kind of declare so publicly. The problem problem of Zionism, the problem of Zionism in how I was raised, the problem of Zionism in my own home, and in my community. So I don't know if it's about being a spokesperson or not, but I can see that I was pleased to retreat from the conversation as soon as I could in the film, and I would never be able to do that today. But it may be because I've also worked through. I mean, I'm not terrified anymore, at all. I could never write a line like anti-Zionism just seems like a cover for anti-Semitism. I could not write that line today. I mean, I've had it with definitions of anti-Semitism and that debate, but I'm certainly am not. I'm not subject. I don't fall for that anymore. It's not working on me in the same way. So I would absolutely have a different relationship to kind of how to handle that material. But I don't know if it was because I'm a spokesperson or, it's more about sort of standing by the work and kind of seeing how you kind of grow apart from it or can kind of see things that you couldn't see before. That is the benefit of hindsight, I guess. What's the other question?
Ben's question about
Okay,
Cynthia.
so that's a funny question. In terms of the film and the filmmaking, it was an incredible, very difficult, and very rewarding process. So I really haven't made a lot of films since then. Cynthia has made many since this film, but for me it was a very rewarding, creative process. Personally, we sort of fell apart toward the end of it. We broke up the same year the film came out. But I wouldn't say it was because of the film. The film kept us together a lot longer. We had to sort of show it. I'm completely rewriting history. We didn't break up. We almost broke up, and we had a very terrible time in that process. But not because of the film. The film and the process of the film and the writing of the script and the shooting of it, even the raising of the money, which was hell. We both grew tremendously. I put my whole PhD aside. I disappeared for 3 years to make this film, and it was an incredible process. But it wasn't the film that created the difficulties, I wouldn't say. In fact, the film kept us together probably longer than we would have been.
Hey. So at the back and then Charlie.
Yeah, thanks. Just because you mentioned it a few times in answers to those questions with regard to the script, obviously I read it as a documentary and being a very personal film. It being scripted in parts doesn't contradict that. There are parts of the film where I felt as a viewer that I knew it was scripted or that it had to be scripted. Other parts like the voicemail where I couldn't tell, I didn't really care. I wondered to what extent that was a deliberate stylistic decision and something you wanted to play with, or whether it was really pragmatic and like synchronized sound on locations really hard or whatever, and whether there was thinking relating to that about what it was saying with regards to sort of your two views on sort of how certain you were about what it was you were saying. Like, there's a lot of like, one of you says one thing, that one goes, "Oh, come on," was there deliberate play with that, or
very deliberate?
Yeah.
Is that the worst thing to say? I feel like I break all kinds of hearts when I say, well, we chose to do a first-person film for strategic and political reasons. And that's not what people want to hear. They want to hear, you put your heart on the film, but that's actually not how this went. For one thing, and I'm very conscious that this is, decades after anybody's shooting on film, but we shot this film very deliberately on 16 millimeter. Which shoots a budget up like you cannot believe, and your shooting ratio has to be very tight. You can't fuck around with 16 millimeter in a film like this. We're never going to be able to raise $1 million to shoot it, so we had to be very, very, very precise. And this is in an era, I know it sounds antediluvian practically. I made this film before the flood. before electricity. But actually, everybody was shooting on video by the 90s. Everybody was shooting on video, and even what was called digital video, but was actually still analog. So there were a lot of questions. Why do you want this? Why do you need this kind of money? You could shoot this on video easily for a lot less money. But aesthetically, we really wanted to shoot this on film. We wanted it to look the way it looks. And that meant, you needed to script it. And the script, I don't know if I've ever revised a script so many times. I remember we had, it was in the 10s, so it's like script number 43, script number 44, kept going. But we also developed scenes as it went, as we got money. We'd go and shoot and then think, that didn't work out the way we thought, we'll have to use it this way, and then we have to rejig this. But maybe it's over-scripted, to be honest. Could be. But it's a very tightly scripted film, the whole thing. Start to finish. Sorry.
Kali.
Thank you. First, I'm sitting here watching it, I think, for the 4th or 5th time, and I was lucky enough to watch it back in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
It always is relevant. It's kind of, exciting and disappointing at the same time, isn't it? There are still,
may be irrelevant. Exactly.
However, I'm taken by two things. First, about the motivation, the strategic and political motivation to make it as a first person in order to also create a dent. I'm not going to ask you whether you created one or not, but you were talking about the audience that you and Cynthia had in mind, and that was kind of our people. I'm not sending you to make another film, but if you were to make one, how would you imagine the audience for that one?
Yeah, it's so hard. I mean, I actually always hate that question that funders ask about audience, as if you have any fucking idea who's ever going to watch anything you make. But like, really, it's a fantasy.
I'm talking about the fantasy.
And it's an imagined, go Benedict Anderson, imagined community. But for this film, I think maybe we were young enough to still be trying to work through our relationships with our parents, right? With how we were raised. And so that community, I mean, it is still an imagined community, but it did gather in my life every Shabbat in synagogue. It did gather, or on the holidays. It did there were faces and names that I could imagine. Today, I really don't know. I mean, I don't know about the rest of you. I would like to hear actually about the rest of you. I don't carry a lot of shame about being Jewish, generally speaking. I'm pleased to be part of this ancient and weird ethnicity thing. But these days, wow, do I carry a burden. I used the term genocide in the film in relation to the Holocaust. And I feel like I used a term, genocide, innocently. I cannot use that term innocently anymore. I bristled that I could speak that word strictly in relation to the Holocaust. I mean, it's as if it's burdened with so much more now. I don't know what the audience is, but I do know that this weird historical relic actually has somebody to talk to now. And the weird thing is we made it at a time when there really weren't enough people to talk to. So I don't know if that's good or bad. Maybe it'd be better if there was nobody to talk to, if it didn't speak to anyone. But I actually wouldn't mind turning it to you all to kind of hear, where you are in relation to, how would you make a film today? Because it's not for me anymore to make that film. I mean, I made it maybe a little bit weirdly too early before there was kind of enough of a community to speak to.
In a way, though, the fact there wasn't a community.
Speak up, I don't think they can hear you.
I don't
You
speak
can.
any loud. No, the fact that there wasn't a community in the same way as there is now allowed you to create a particular type of film without this sort of self-consciousness, perhaps. But I think, but the point I was thinking about is the way in which we're talking more about the sort of Zionism than the lesbian aspect.
Yeah.
I mean, that seems to just completely doesn't matter. That's not important. And I think that still says something to the way in which Zionism is done. Absolutely, it's Jews have to be Zionist, and to question it in that way, I think is really, really important. And I think, as we were saying here, even more so in the States than here, but there's no question about it. How can you separate the two things? And I think
there's beginning to be thank God there are finally some cracks in that system. But honestly, I'd be very interested to hear, from you, kind of what you can draw from this, and what you might want to create in relation to.
I think there was one at the back, Rick, just in case. No, wasn't there? No? Okay, yeah.
I was gonna say that you said I want we have to recognise we're still a minority in the Jewish community, so I want to confront the Jewish community with our views and ideas, and I think until we continue to do that, we can't penetrate the Jewish community. Of course, we want to include and be inclusive of Palestinians and others, but I still want to penetrate the Jewish community because it's so important to me.
As a sort of non-Zionist.
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah.
okay?
Yeah.
Not as part of the sort of
So all the way in the back was that.
Yeah, and
I think I'm writing a kind of screenplay sort of thing now, but I think it's about confronting the liberal Zionist parents still, because I'm going further through the representation of innocence of young people who they'll still kind of listen to, because right now I feel I was talking to my mom and she said that is the highest number of people going to Israel tour still, and I was like, what? It blew my mind, because I was like, oh, surely no one's going, and that's insane. It's from a parental perspective as well. It's you're sending your kids into a danger, and then she was like, no, but it's protected. It's nothing ever happens. But I think it's about that conversation where it's how do you package something that actually changes those minds of the parents who are this is so wrong, but I still want my 16-year-old to spend a month there in July.
So it's a fiction film?
Yeah, through a relationship.
There was another one?
yeah, there was.
Yeah, this isn't really a fully fleshed out point, but there was one part which really stood out for me in the film where you were cutting up the newspapers and there's some kind of reflection around the far right of our community, and we don't have a way of speaking out. I can't remember the exact phrase, but
What was about the representation, whether we're in the news too much or in the news too little, whether we're.
It was less the representation point and more how do we find a way of contesting the views of the far right wing of our community whilst not kind of fanning the flames of anti-Semitism elsewhere, and that kind of stood out for me because it feels like we're really in that moment again, and then the additional comment that you made about genocide no longer being, again, fascism for me now is a term that I can't use without thinking about literal Jewish fascists that we ourselves are trying to contest, and how strange this kind of mirror world that we've entered is. And so I guess, I'm not a filmmaker and I'm not a writer, but thinking about that feels so alive for me in terms of what we're trying to work through and think about.
You said, but you're not. Well, how would you describe yourself?
I'm a campaigner.
good. Probably just more important.
She
Yeah.
runs campaigns at Na'ama.
Yeah, this is absolutely key. But I like the description of the mirror world, right? I mean, it does feel like,
That'd be fine, but.
yeah, it's like the gaslighting that we were raised with and on. It's just like, whoa. So, yeah, Naomi Klein's it.
I wouldn't say that. Yeah, I was kind of shocked by hearing that you were reconsidering the same question I asked earlier about if you'd answered the question, because as a film, I think it's sound in its presentation because a lack of conclusion is kind of inherent to the question.
Yeah.
Yeah. And returning to your personal connections with Jewish people is, at the end of the film, was, I think, the perfect way to finish it, because it always comes back to meeting up with other Jewish people who, I mean, our family's been in England for so long and so far from the religion that the Zionist question for me is bizarre, because I don't have any Zionists in my family that haven't been for a long time, so, well, I don't know, but,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think
Lucky you.
the film being really representative of the problem, not it never goes anywhere, but that who you choose to communicate with and having the discussion at all is the important.
But maybe I can clarify. So we have that scene with all these lesbians and we're asking them all kinds of questions. We don't ask any of them about Zionism. I would just left that alone. So how is it, how do you identify as a Jewish lesbian, or how do we deal with the left or being, activists or whatever? How did we not ask that? It's like the whole film builds to a critique of that position, and then we leave it. So yes, I'm auto-critiquing. It's not important, but thank you for affirming that you like the ending. It's just, it seems an odd omission, like that needed to be integrated there. How are you all dealing with your relationship to Israel and Zionism? But instead we kind of leave it.
But I mean, the characters, the people who are talking to have a concept of Jewishness as a category that they bring in the voice notes, right? That isn't actually suffused or exhausted or kind of subsumed into the category.
How do we
of
even
Zionism.
know? We didn't even ask.
Yeah, but when they say I think of myself as a Jew, as a lesbian, so I don't know, it felt like Jewishness and queerness were being constellated, and the question of their, like how they are two categories and how they sit in relation to other categories, rather than the question of what does Zionism then do to the Jewishness?
Yeah, which felt at the time, as I've already indicated, a very divisive question. Melanie K. Kantrowitz would have been totally fine with that question. But I'm not sure if all of the people I asked would have
So you
been.
think unconsciously you were trying to preserve this new Jewish diaspora?
I'm like asking my younger self, how did I not raise that? Yeah. How did we not include that in part of the questions? It jumped out at me this time, and it had never jumped out before. Wow, okay.
Can I ask, just in relation to that last sort of publication that you gave to what films people make now, do you feel there's an onus now on anti-Zionist Jews or people in our movement who are creatives to create work that speaks to now? Because I think it is a big question of whether or not it's possible for us to separate ourselves from this when we're making.
It's a good question. Is there an onus? I don't know. I suppose I would say that, it's important for us to be seen and visible in any way we can, and we are endlessly being invisibilized and discredited. We know this. And it's very important to find a way to articulate these positions, but it could be, how many of you have seen Israelism?
Oh, yes.
So that's a completely different approach to this. And an approach that we wouldn't have taken then, but it's not an approach I would take now either. It's a fairly mainstream kind of traditional documentary formally, and we were really interested in a marriage of form and content. That if we were kind of positing ourselves as Treyf, we wanted to think about the form that Treyf takes. What does that look like? How do you make an untraditional film, an unorthodox film, as I said? And I think thinking about form is important in relation to this, without then necessarily making something so obscure that nobody can watch it or make any sense of it. That was a huge challenge for us, because Cynthia comes from a much more experimental tradition. She's like, I don't want to make a documentary, I hate documentaries. And what she meant by that was she hated talking heads, and I love talking heads too. I could watch pure talking heads, but I still wanted to be, I wanted to push something formally. I wanted, talking heads that has the talking heads listen to themselves again and review what they've own said, something reflexive, something that breaks, the seamlessness of the form and really challenges form. I kind of want to put that challenge up there. What would it look like today? I'm happy for a film like Israelism to exist. I think it's important, but I'd be even happier to see, people really pushing those boundaries formally and doing really interesting, unexpected, beautiful work.
There's a challenge to the audience. Are there any other questions? Oh, Bo.
Yeah, thanks for the films. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I suppose, I have another question sort of relating to the end of the film, but maybe a bit more about the sort of tie into, Yiddish New York and everything at the end. And then I guess as well to the sort of leaving aside Zionism and the community again. I feel that's, obviously that choice feels like, for the reasons you said, you could make it now in relation to Zionism, but I was thinking also, how does it then complicate how to think about and represent that community now, that not only is there this, you can't stigmatize the question of Zionism, but through Zionism, how a large part of the Reichsbach community is then allied with fascism in the diaspora, and with via the sort of instrumentalization of anti-Semitism. For example, I'm thinking of the deportations in the US over Palestine activism and the role of far-right Jewish organizations in pushing of those. I don't really have an extremely specific question, but how so I'm doing I'll say lots of it. But how do you then how would that then complicate how you would push people on the question of what it means to be in the diaspora now? I guess at the end of the film, how would that complicate people about that? I don't know. Does that make sense?
I'm not sure I get it.
So I mean in terms of it feels in the film you can make a choice at the end to be I choose diaspora and I choose New York, and it's the kind of thing that even while trying to forget, even if you did that and then try to forget about Zionism, forget about Israel, you'd still see then Jewish organizations cheering on deportations in.
Okay.
See what I mean?
Yeah, in a way, I see what you mean. Obviously, the Jewish right existed then in the diaspora, and it's only gotten stronger and crazier since then. I think what we were trying to do was to say there is a tradition, there's a strain within Judaism that we can draw from. That we are, we're not alone here, and you can find it wherever you are, but certainly given that my family immigrated to the U.S. and into the Lower East Side of New York, and I knew of the tradition of the socialists and the anarchists and the union organizers and the trade unionists, that there was something to draw from there that was not from a Zionist root, and we needed it, and we need it still. So I think it's more that to say, again, as I started, we don't need to be inventing this, we need to know where we come from. And the way many of us were raised, we were not exposed to that, but it existed right alongside of all these other strains of Judaism, and we need them. We need to know them, we need to draw from them to be able to fight that tendency, the right-wing tendency in Judaism. It's not a necessity, and it's not, but it's there, and we need to know there are historical options. That's why we end up in the Lower East Side, not really for nostalgic purposes. And we couldn't shoot it today because of gentrification. That Lower East Side does not exist. Is that it?
Yeah, I think we're going to be kicked out. I actually have a question from that, so I'm going to not ask it. And thank you all for coming. You're welcome to stay in the bar.
You're welcome to ask the question in the bar.
And yeah, it was a joy to see you, and it was a joy.
Thank you.